just check I can see the people that I know I need for this next one. I can see Heleth, that's great. Good. Okay, I think we could probably, oh, the recording started. Thanks, Nathan, that's great. Okay, right, we will make a start. So you will see on the agenda, so we've got 2 finance papers which Heleth will lead on, and we will start excuse me, we will start with our month 12 draft positions. So I will hand over to you, Heleth.
Thank you, Sarah. Hopefully this item will be relatively quick. So just to remind, the opening deficit for 23-24 was a gap of 98.172 million with a 29.5 million savings target, and that left a residual deficit of 68.672 million. As at 31st of March, as Alex said within his update for the FRP committee, we did have a draft position for NHS Highland of 29.235 million. And with agreement from the committee, we requested brokerage support of 29.5 million from Scottish Government, which has resulted in a position of 265,000 surplus, which of course is subject to our audit. At this time, our external audit colleagues haven't identified any issues to raise, so that's positive at this point. So just to remind board members that brokerage is effectively a loan from Scottish Government. It is repayable at the point that the board moves back into financial balance. So we requested 16.272 million last year in 22-23. So that together with the 28.5 million that we've just requested for the 23-24 position, that gives a cumulative total of 44.772 million that will be repayable debt. On page 6 of the finance report, we've included a summary of the movements from the opening position, just to give an overview of the changes that have happened, which you can see are predominantly due to additional allocations that we've received throughout the year. There is an under delivery against the savings target, but this was offset with non-recurrent cost reductions and actions that we put in place, and some slippage against allocations. Key areas to highlight within the operational areas are both the acute and North Highland Health and Social Care Partnership ended up the year spending more than the plan, but this was also against a higher budget, and the Argyll and Bute IGB have delivered a break-even position. So to note, the adult social care position did close at a break-even position, which is also due to unexpected allocations that we received and confirmation of a non-recurrent allocation that was made recurrent, so that wasn't factored into our original plan. And then we also saw some reduced commitments against sustainability payments. The savings target, as I said, wasn't delivered in full. So of the 29.5 million target, 13.572 was delivered, with 8.113 million of that recurrent. Just to apologise as well, I've noticed that the capital update hasn't been included within the report. But just to give a verbal update on that, there was an additional spend of 1.319 million against the capital plan for the year. But this was due to additional costs as a result of the capital pause, and it was supported by Scottish Government, so no impact to NHS Highland and our accounts. And within this paper, we've given moderate assurance at this point, and that's only until the audit is complete. We can't give full assurance substantial assurance, until we've been through that audit process. But as I said, no material items have been identified at this time, and happy to take questions.
Many thanks, Heleth. So happy to take questions or comments on the month 12 position. Appreciate there's probably lots of questions that come into the next item, but if we want to do any just now, we can pick those up. Okay, just bear with me a second then. So we are being asked to, Heleth, oh sorry, Anne, sorry.
Sorry, Sarah. I wasn't too sure whether to ask this in this item or the next item, but I'll do it now. So Heleth, as is noted in the paper, there's been some quite substantial change in the position over the course of the year. And you've outlined a number of the reasons for that. So I suppose what I was wondering was whether you could comment on whether you expect, to see that same movement, new allocations, additional funding, or what financial flexibility is applying into the current financial year and the item that we're about to discuss, or whether, that degree of shift across the course of the year you see as having been a bit of a one-off.
Thanks, Anne. And I think that shift in years has been replicated in previous years as well. So I think it would be generally quite sensible to assume that we would be getting additional allocations throughout the year. But I think that for this financial year that we're in now, the financial position is quite different. So I don't think we can make that assurance. I certainly couldn't take an estimate of what that would look like. We are being told that there is no additional funding sat within Scottish Government. So I guess everything would be reliant on any consequentials we might get through. But we also know that the pay deal hasn't been agreed for the 24-25 position yet either. So that could have an impact on the finances available. So at this point, even though within the budget paper we'll kind of explain that we will work with government throughout the year to look for additional areas to bring our position down, I don't think that we could make an assumption or an estimate of that at this point. So no, I don't really think that I could give a view on it which would be accurate.
Thanks, Heleth. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. So for this particular item, we were being asked to examine the draft month 12 financial position and consider the implications. And as Heleth explained, due to the audit position, take moderate assurance at this point. Is everybody happy to do that? Lovely. Okie dokie. So that moves us on then to the next item, which is probably of more interest at this point for members. So this is our financial plan for 2024 to 25. Back to you, Heleth.
Thank you, Sarah. And just a note as well that normally we would take this kind of jointly with the next item that we have, which is the ADP. But due to the ADP not having been agreed at Scottish Government at this point, we've had to withdraw that item as that can't be shared as a public document until we've had that Scottish Government agreement of the plan. But just to assure members of the board that we have jointly built up that ADP and financial plan. So everything that I will articulate to go through within the finance plan is being reflected through the ADP. So the two do kind of stand side by side, but just can't be shared at this time. So the 3-year financial plan provides you with an overview of the financial planning process that we've undertaken and the proposed opening budget. This is going to be quite a lengthy item, so I do apologise because it's quite a complex area, and particularly this year we've seen far more complexity and requirements than we have previously. So there's been quite a process that we've gone through, and I'm going to try to take you through some of the stages and the thinking that we've gone through in order to get to the budget that we're proposing. So just a brief background and highlight the key assumptions. We were being asked by Scottish Government to deliver 3% recurrent savings. That's an expectation on us. And we were asked to deliver an improvement against the 23-26 plan that we'd submitted for the year 2 position, so the 24-25 year. And then later the budget announcement highlighted that there was no additional uplift to core allocation, so effectively it's a flat cash settlement to 24-25. There are additional allocations to be confirmed, and there is a commitment from Scottish Government that around 80% of the allocation should be confirmed within the first quarter of the year. And there was a confirmation of the additional funding for adult social care to cover the £12 an hour that Jerry mentioned in his update, and that passed through to the council. And we've had confirmation from Highland Council that that will be passed over to the adult social care budget within health. And we also had the confirmation that the capital funding was to be paused for the major programmes. And later we also received notification that a brokerage cap would be set for those boards at level 2 or 3 of the escalation framework. And for us at that point, that was 35 million. So within the first plan, the opening deficit was provided with an assumption of 3% savings, which wasn't accepted by government, who reiterated the need to deliver a balanced position utilising the maximum brokerage. So within the second submission, I provided detail in Appendix 2 of the breakdown of the funding and pressures that got us to our opening position. And the pressures are all through committed programmes that we had already committed to. The income assumptions predominantly around adult social care and new medicines funding. But these contributed to an opening deficit of 112.5 million. We've provided information relating to the process that we then followed for the identification of the cost reduction programme, which is not insignificant at 84 million. So first of all, we have worked through the 3% cost reductions and efficiencies. That was the requirement. We have established the value and efficiency programme, and that's mainly focusing on supplementary staffing, prescribing, corporate costs. So, for example, our estates infrastructure and maximising income. So those themes are looking at how we do what we do now better. So effectively shouldn't have an impact to the delivery of services. We're just doing them in the cheaper or more efficient way that reduces the cost of it. And we do also have some elements within those schemes that don't have financial values against them in the appendices, but they're enablers to deliver some of those other areas. So, for example, digital will hopefully reduce our workforce requirements, so our reliance on supplementary staffing. So they have a interconnectedness. Secondly, we looked at some non-recurrent benefits, and predominantly we were just looking at slippage and allocations. We were looking at our previous spend trends and where we have allocations that we get every year, and we have just natural slippage due to not necessarily recruiting against them every year. So we thought that was a relatively safe assumption, no impact to services if these have been ongoing, and it's not a refusing to spend or a pause on any spend. It's just a natural slippage that we do see, and we don't normally assume it into our position, but we have done. And then we looked at the assumptions we have around our social care partnerships, the health and social care partnership within Argyll and Bute, and our adult social care lead provider model. And we submitted a draft plan that identified that they would both break even, as is their responsibilities and duty. So we did put for a break-even position. Argyll and Bute did originally submit a plan that identified a gap of 2.7 million after savings and identified reductions, but since then have confirmed that this can be covered through further reserves and non-recurrent measures. So we have confidence in the delivery of the Argyll and Bute break-even position. Adult social care is a little more complex. We had an opening operational deficit of 16.252 million identified for adult social care, and then we were made aware of a reduction to the quantum of 7 million by the Highland Council as part of their savings plan within their budget. That hasn't been formally confirmed to us in writing, but we've included it for prudence. We have set a target to deliver 3% efficiencies against adult social care through the value and efficiency programmes in the same line as the rest of the board savings, and again with a focus on supplementary staffing and maximising income. So therefore, in order to deliver a balanced position for adult social care, we will need to work closely with Highland Council to identify a plan that closes that gap, and that's not yet been identified, and therefore the 7 million and the remaining 10.5 million is a high risk to the NHS Highlands financial position. There is a duty for the adult social care to balance, as I've mentioned, within the health budget, but at this time there's no complete plan in place to deliver this, although there are some schemes and areas that have been identified that have been worked up. But due to the level of risk that I think is identified within that element of the plan, it is recommended that the adult social care financial position will be monitored separately, will be added as a separate risk on the risk register, and then monitored through Finance Resource and Performance Committee. The remaining gap then, Scottish Government have asked us to describe as our choices, and what are our choices as an organisation to put forward to close that gap. We've tried to move the language away a little bit from choices. I'm not sure it clearly articulates what it is we need to do. So I've tried to describe them more as further actions, though those additional steps that we would have to take, and they're not necessarily choices that we would make. So table 5 gives some information on the remaining actions that were provided in the submission, which focused on 2 key areas, which were to freeze spend of allocations. So whereas I mentioned previously just identifying slippage, this is a conscious freezing of allocations where we hadn't committed the money recurrently. And then the other one was around supplementary staffing, and looking at the remainders of the supplementary staffing plans within value and efficiency was all around doing things better, making sure that systems and processes were in place, making sure that we had the best prices available. This supplementary staffing was around actually just having to stop supplementary staffing in areas which would impact on services. So both of these actions would have impact to the delivery of services, and were not supported actions by the board, but were highlighted in the submission as the actions that we'd have to take and be progressed to deliver a balanced position. We've also agreed to progress a strategic assessment of services to support long-term sustainability through data-driven options. Again, we've not included those within the finance plan, but it's an area that we need to look at the redesign of our services going forward. To note at this submission, an additional allocation had been confirmed, which reduced the brokerage being made available from 35 million to 28.4 million, just in case you were wondering how that changed throughout the year. So we received additional allocation, or assumption of additional allocation, but we were asked to take that off the brokerage that we could expect. The feedback to the plan is that the plan is still considered in draft, but there is no expectation for a resubmission at this point. So since the submission of the plan, there are a few changes confirmed as set out in table 6, and that table also represents the budget that we're proposing to be agreed at this meeting today. Therefore, to summarise, we are proposing 3% efficiencies through the value and efficiency programme, including adult social care. I do need to note here that delivery of 3% is extremely challenging. As I noted in the previous report, we didn't deliver the 3%, which is at 29.5 million for last financial year. So the scale of this challenge is quite significant, but we have started to progress that work already. It's a commitment that we have made. The financial flexibilities through non-recurrent slippage, so we're proposing that we anticipate those within the plan. That the Argyll and Bute and adult social care deliver a balanced position, again recognising the high risk of that sits behind that ambition for the adult social care budget. And the remaining gap of 50.6 with the 28.4 million brokerage supporting that would leave a 22.2 million deficit unidentified, and that we would offer a commitment to work with Scottish Government to identify further options to close that gap throughout the year. And Scottish Government have asked us to resubmit those additional actions since this report was written, and we've got a submission to put in there, which will be in line with our previous draft submission. So will be those actions on supplementary staffing and allocations. And just to note, the impact of reporting a deficit within the account could lead to a Section 22 report. Also, as mentioned in the month 12 update, this would also increase our brokerage that we have to a total of 73.172 million by the end of 24-25. I'm going to stop there. Hopefully I've taken you through the paper, but any questions, happy to answer.
Thank you, Heleth. That was really helpful to be taken through that process, because I recognise that it has been different from how things have happened in the past. So I think that's been really helpful for members to understand how we've got to where we are. Okay, I'm going to open up, please, for questions, comments, musings, challenge, anything we like. I think it's important that we go through this in some detail. Okay, I have got Muriel first.
Thank you, Helen, for the clarity of the report. Regarding buildings and estates, do we have any opportunities for co-locations and anything like that? And do we have any rack problems? Sorry, that I'm trying to read my notes on the screen here. Thank you.
Thank you, Muriel. With regards co-locations and that side, so they're the strategic assessments that I mentioned that we're talking through. So we're currently going through a data collection exercise to see what we deliver where the opportunities for a bit of capacity might sit, and if we joined up services, how we could provide things a bit differently. So that's quite early stages at the moment, but there's certainly areas that we're looking at, we will have to consider. With regards RAC, I will defer to my colleague Richard.
Yeah, Richard's got his hand up there. Well done, Richard.
Thanks. Yeah, we're always looking at co-locations, and as Helen said, it's part of the choices piece. But we're working quite closely now with Highland Council to explore any opportunities that are available to us, and with our other public sector partners as well. In terms of RAC, we've been under a Scottish Government scheme that's seen inspections at all our buildings. So at this moment in time, we've got a RAC identified a number of buildings, but it's all been identified as low risk, which will just fit into the ongoing management plan category. We do have RAC at New Craigs, and there's PFI providers up there just now. They're doing further surveys to look at that and see what the implications are there. That's not a liability we carry, but it affects our staff in those buildings. But again, that's ongoing through the management phase just now, with intrusive surveys ongoing actually as we speak.
Thank you, Richard. That was great. Okay, I've got a couple of questions which I will bring in while others think what they would like to ask. So just in terms, I don't have the right page in front of me, so I'm just doing this off my notes, but just picking up that bit about the financial flex, Heleth. Now, I'm possibly conflating two different things here, but I saw in some of the narrative that there have been discussions and there is work ongoing to try to avoid that yearly problem that we have of late allocations, and trying to bring, I think I saw something about bring 80% of the allocations into the first quarter or something like that. So if that happens, then great, you know, because that's been our kind of annual challenge, hasn't it, with all these late allocations. But does that impact our thinking around that financial flex figure at all? And possibly we've already considered that, but I'm interested to know how we sort of offset one against the other.
Yeah, yes and no. So at the moment, we've not factored anything into that kind of scenario. A lot of those areas, we already have services and we have services running, so we won't have stopped those services at this point in time. But what we don't necessarily know is the full value that we're going to receive. We've had early indication where we are expecting to get money. So Catherine mentioned the mental health outcomes funding previously. So we know that there's something on its way. What we haven't seen is the final value. And we know that our allocations have been reducing. So the ones that have come through are generally coming through for the last couple of years on a reduced value each year. So we've got less to play with. One of the things that we have talked about is just having a central review of new allocations as they come in, to take that assessment of how do we best utilise the money. At the moment, what can happen is that the allocation goes straight into the service, who, you know, it's great to have all the best intentions of what they then do with that money. However, if we had a different view onto it, we might look to spend the money differently. So I'm not saying that we wouldn't, but we might use it with a different team who's already providing a similar service and strengthen that team rather than doing something new. So I think it does provide us with an opportunity of looking at allocations as they come up to say, how can we deliver this differently if we've not committed recurrently against it already? And that then by having a different service model might have cost efficiencies with it, and we could release the funding into the bottom line.
Okay, no, that's helpful, thank you. Okay, well, Muriel's hand is up, but I think it's possibly a legacy hand. Okay, I'll bring Anne in, and then if Muriel did want to come in, I can bring her in after. So Anne, over to you, please.
Thanks, Sarah. I'd just like to explore further a number of issues in relation to the adult social care challenges in North Highland, Helaeth. First of all, just on a sort of technical front, the paper refers to the fact that we haven't had a formal opening offer from the council, although we're assuming that that will be including a 7 million reduction in the quantum. Could you just explain what the process is in terms of achieving a certainty around that issue, and where we are in that process, or how you expect that to develop? Well, we are already into the new financial year, so that's a sort of my technical questions. But more broadly, and this may be for others, Fiona or Pam, perhaps, we know how challenging it is going to be to even make our a 3% saving within that budget, never mind an additional saving or transformation to address the operational deficit, and then the potential 7 million reduction in the quantum. We talk a lot about how we will need political cover from Scottish Government for some of our more challenging strategic transformations that we might have to undertake to achieve some sort of sustainability. But I wondered if someone could comment on how we are going to work within the partnership to obtain the local political cover we will need to work with our communities to deliver that kind of change in the adult social care budget. And then finally, I think you did address this in your presentation, but just to be absolutely sure, could you just confirm that we will not be using any element of the health budget to cover any deficit at the year end in the adult social care budget? Thanks.
Thanks, Anne. I can see, Helaeth, I know you want to come back, but I can see that Fiona's got her hand up as well. So Fiona, do you want to come in first?
Sorry, I couldn't get my mouse to the right place. Yes, I'm happy to do so. I think Anne's comments are very wise, because 3% is a challenging target, both within health and adult social care, in regard of the value and efficiency programme that Helaeth has laid out so clearly in her report. And if we achieve that in 24-25, that will be significantly ahead of value and efficiency savings that have been made in the last few years within the board. So we must not underestimate the scale of change and effort that will take to be successful. So I think in regard of the adult social care section above that 3% target, it's very clear to me that the only way that we can start to tackle that is by ourselves and Highland Council having a joint vision and then approach to significant transformation and a radical redesign of the way that we think about and deliver adult social care in the Highland area. And I think that we have early indications that that will be possible. I think the delivery plan that the council have put together does indicate a willingness and commitment to transformation, but with early leadership being in the place in Highland Council, as I am early in my leadership, then more needs to be done to flesh out how we align our own transformational plans within NHS Highland with the aspiration and content of the council delivery plan. And as I said in my initial commentary, I've had a lot of engagement already with the Chief Executive of Highland Council in how we can bring our collective organisations together in a way that we haven't been successful in doing before to undertake that. But I think it's right that the risk is substantial that Heledd has identified, and I welcome the suggestion of identifying that risk explicitly and that being closely monitored through ordinary scrutiny processes, so that assurance can be given of that activity that both organisations need to bring together. I think in terms of how we get that political support, I think probably we need to do some collective thinking about the utilisation of our committee structure, the committee structure of the council, and whether there are some bespoke sessions that we need to maybe organise where the way that we're thinking is brought to the wider audience of our local elected members and vice versa, because I think the scale of the challenge is so substantial that I don't think we can say that our existing arrangements are necessarily sufficient on their own to have the right kind of conversation with the right kind of reach to ensure that we have a broad consensus in what we want to do in taking forward change. So probably I'll just draw my comments to a close there, and I'm not sure if Heledd wants to pick up some of the more technical parts of Anne's question.
Thank you, Fiona. Yeah, I'll come in there. So the first question you asked, Anne, was around the process, I think, for our opening quantum, and agreeing that within the integration agreement, there is a clear budget setting process. And as part of that, we should have the quantum notified to us in writing. Historically, that hasn't happened. And generally speaking, we've just taken an assumption of a rollover recurrent budget. And then at the end of the year, we agree the position. We know though now that that's not, it's not good enough, and it's not the process that we need to be taking. So for this year, our intention is to get that opening quantum agreed within the first quarter. So my team are already speaking to the finance team within the council to get that opening position agreed and settled. So hopefully by the next board meeting, certainly, then we should have more clarity on that. But the formal process is identified in the integration agreement. It just hasn't been followed previously. Just also to note around that, the additional changes and redesign and change that we have to make with adult social care that Fiona described, then the council have also within their budget paper made it explicit that there will be 20 million available for that transformation and change. They've also had some support in to identify areas of change as well, and they've been focusing particularly on digital and the use of digital, and they're more than happy to share that learning with us. And if there's any spend to save schemes that they've identified that we can then roll out across social care and even wider into health, and they're happy to work with us on those as well. So there are already areas around the transformation where the council are supporting in those areas. With regards the health budget, I think as set out in the paper, what I'm saying is that from a budgetary perspective, we have to assume that adult social care will deliver a balanced budget. From a technical point of view, if by the end of the year that doesn't happen and we haven't got planned reductions and agreements in place with the council, then any deficit to the position will be reported through the board's financial statements. The only way that we could offset that would be to put some kind of provision or creditor or something, debtor in place in the accounts. But technically speaking, a deficit would be recorded through the financial statements, and that would be above our planned deficit, and would be reported in the statements in that way and would have to be highlighted. But the intention here is that we do manage to get to agreement in a plan where we don't have that deficit position, and that's why I'm setting the expectation that health shouldn't hold a deficit, which is why our opening budget shouldn't recognise a deficit. How it actually ends at the end of the year might be different, and that would be a conversation that we would have to have with the council on how we resolve that. Which is similar to the last financial year where we thought we would have a 4 million deficit, and we worked with the council to resolve that as well through the allocations and the changes.
Okay, Thanks, Heleth. I'll just check. Anne, did you want to come back on that? Is that okay for now?
No, that's helpful.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you both. And I've got Alistair would like to come in next. Alistair?
Yep, thank you. Some of us that have been around a few years now will have noted that we've had challenges in the past and gaps and brokerage and everything that goes with it, and plans to save money, make savings. And I suppose if we were marking our own scorecard on that, we have found it challenging as a board to make those levels of historic savings. And this year, or this plan is taking it to a whole new level, or way above anything that we've actually had to manage or deal with before. And I just want to get some thought around. I know it's got limited assurance, but I do find the report quite optimistic in some areas of addressing the gap, whether that's just figures slotted in to show how we can address the gap mathematically, with the difficulty of how in reality we do it operationally or service wide. And I also note in the report it talks about a suite of choices should be included for approval to progress. Who's actually approving those choices? It reads in the report that Scottish Government is requesting that suite of choices be included. Does that mean that the Scottish Government is approving the choices that we put forward to progress, or is it some sort of co-production and co-decision making on the choices? And what actually happens if we roll forward 12 months and we don't close that gap to the brokerage, and indeed it gets worse, because there's so many variables and risks associated with this, that it seems that we need to do a bit more scenario planning around this as to what things actually mean, what support are we actually going to get, what is going to happen with the 20 million transformation fund with the council. How is that going to be accessed? When's it going to be accessed? What are the milestones for accessing it? Because it's a huge number in terms of the gap that we're facing. So I don't know, Sarah, is this planning to come back meeting upon meeting to get further updates on this? But to me at the moment, I've got more questions than I have answers.
Thanks, Alistair. And I think your questions reflect the anxieties and the challenges, I suppose, that we've been living through, and Heleth and her team have no doubt been sort of grappling with as they've been working in response to the sort of the changes and the requests that have come through from Scottish Government. I don't know, Heleth or Fiona, if you want to pick that up. I think specifically Alistair's questions about the choices and I suppose that bit of the process, I think that's really helpful for the board to understand, and to pick up Alistair's sort of final bit about it's a really good point about process, given that this has been quite different, and given where we are in the year, how we are going to manage this as a board going forward, and picking up the elements of risk that have been touched on so many times as well. So I don't know, Heleth, I'll hand over to you to respond there.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I'll start with the first question. I'll try and take them in turn, Alistair, but there was a lot of questions in there. The risk bit, I guess it's not meant to be a positive report. I don't think that the information of the numbers are positive. There's nothing that kind of suggests that it's going to be easy to deliver any of those numbers, and I was hoping that it reflected within the risk section the level of risk to delivering all those numbers. So as I've said, even the 3% efficiencies is going to be extremely challenging. The non-recurrent flexibilities bit, I think is pretty safe. We've seen that year on year, comfortable with that. I'm comfortable with the Argyll and Bute financial position, but as Graham described previously, that's not necessarily due to good reasons either. It's due to inability to recruit and slippage in areas and things as well. So that's not a positive point of view from a service delivery, but it's positive from a financial aspect. And we've had a lot of conversation now about the risk around adult social care. That's extremely high risk, delivering that financial position. I'm hoping that the paper does reflect that. With regards to choices, as I said, is a language that the Scottish Government have used at the start of the budget setting process, where they were trying to get us to look at some of the other options that might be available to us as boards, or that could be considered nationally. So we went through a lengthy process of identifying national interventions and changes that were put forward, and Scottish Government had taken those forward, but they're not within the individual board's gift to influence. So the ones that they're asking us are the things that are within the board's influence, and predominantly the areas that we've identified are just those areas where our spend is non-recurrent, or we've got variable spend, we don't have fixed costs, because that's the only thing that we can influence quickly. So that's why we've got the additional impacts and assessments of supplementary staffing and just not spending allocations, because that's about all that's within our gift in a 1 year turnaround. So we do have to present those to the Scottish Government. We did do that in our draft plan that we submitted in March, and we had a response back to say that, you know, the plan is still considered to be in draft, and that's because a decision hasn't been taken on those further actions. I'm not going to call them choices, because that suggests that they're things that we might want to do, and these were not things that we wanted to do. So that kind of conversation with approval is around Scottish Government and what they're willing to accept, because what we are saying is, if we have to implement some of those actions, there will be an impact to services, there will be an impact to our performance, which means, you know, our waiting lists get longer, people don't get treated, and Scottish Government do have to have a part to play in that part of the conversation. We're telling them what we would have to do to deliver a financial position, but there's also the wider view to look at than just the finances. So there has to be a trade-off at some point between the financial position and everything else that is impacted from finance. You know, finances are there to buy things that then deliver things. So if you stop the finance, then something else has to give. I think the other question was, what happens if we don't deliver some of these elements? Then if we don't deliver to the brokerage gap, then we report a deficit within our financial statements, which then likely potential that we would get a Section 22 report, and we could get invited by our external auditor to speak at the Parliamentary Audit Committee. That's a conversation we'd have to have with external audit colleagues. We haven't been told of any further sanctions that Scottish Government might take around the escalation process. We've tried to ask that question, and we haven't had clarity at the moment. They're just asking us to deliver the 3%, which is why we're going through that further process. So we don't have an agreed target by Scottish Government other than our brokerage target. That's the message that they're giving us clearly, is that our obligation is to deliver a balanced position. That's our statutory duty, and that they're giving us a maximum brokerage that will help us to do that. But there is a gap within our ambitious plan to even get to that point. We are not unique as a board in this position either. So virtually every board, I'm not going to say every board, but I would imagine even if every board is going through a similar conversation in their boards, and they're seen within their board papers as well, where we've got this kind of gap from either brokerage or break even. The boards that are currently on level 1 of escalation and have been breaking even for years don't have a brokerage gap. So they're working through the same process that we are. With regards to the adult social care and the 20 million, that's part of that plan. We need to identify is, what do we need to get to? How do we need to get there? And then we draw up how would the 20 million support us to get there? So that's the bit that we recognise hasn't been done yet, and we really do need to move into a space of having that identified quite quickly. I think that's answered most of the questions, or everything that I'm able to answer at this point.
Thank you, Hillis. That's really helpful. And I suppose just before I bring Jerry and Alex in, it'll be no surprise that the conversation that we're having today is being replicated in boards across the country, and indeed at a national level. That kind of challenge that you outlined, Alistair, that balance and how we do one and the other at the same time. So I suppose in many ways we are having that same conversation that other boards are having, and indeed that wicked problem that they're contemplating at a government level. But I suppose the added element for us is that rural and island, you know, the additional costs, the additional workforce and geographical challenges that sit heavier on us than they will for some of the other boards as well. So it's important that we kind of keep feeding that into the conversation. But I'm going to bring in Jerry next, followed by Alex. So Jerry, I will bring you in, please.
Thank you, Sarah. I don't actually have any questions on the report itself. I've had the benefit of exploring this at the Finance and Performance Committee and with Helen outside of the committee as well. And probably the first thing I'd like to say is really well done to Helen and the team for how they've actually presented what is a very complex and complicated position with probably more moving parts than anybody would ever like to have within a financial plan which you can hang your hat on. Although I would much rather being a very traditional person, I would like the bottom right hand corner to add up to 0, but it doesn't. But what I like about the plan is what Helen and the team have done is the way they have broken it down into these component elements, and I think that's a key factor. I think we could get overwhelmed if we sit here and we say, how do we, looking at the table 5 just for reference, how do we save £84 million? So that's not a question that anybody can actually sit down and reasonably come up with an easy answer to. But then if you actually look at the work programmes which are broken down there, we've got the value and efficiency, we've got Argyll and Bute, we've got adult social care, we've got financial flexibility, and then we've got other actions, I think, as Helen quite rightly refers to them. And I think we've got to think about it like that, and we've got to structure our thinking about that and focus our attention. I think I said it, I can't remember if it was in the Finance Committee or at the last board meeting, delivery of the 3% on its own would be a big challenge. And that's going to take up so much of our thinking anyway. So we've got to then think about the processes for the other elements of that. And it's really good that Argyll and Bute, from what I'm hearing, are saying, yes, we believe, knowing what we know today, that we can deliver that £6 million. And I think it's very sensible that we view adult social care in the same vein, that the expectation within our financial plan is that it will balance. How we're actually going to get it to achieve balance is actually going to require work across the year. So I think we're going about it in the correct manner. I think the point I would pick up from Alistair's comments is yes, us and many other boards have moved into a totally different world in terms of discussing what these numbers mean, and actually what they mean probably in the absolute quantum, but what they actually mean in how we actually approach this. So yes, I don't like the answer, but I am supportive of the approach that Helen has made. I've got a lot of confidence, a really high degree of confidence in what we're seeing coming through. I don't think the paper is optimistic. I think it breaks down what might be a route map to where we need to get to. And in a few months' time, Helen and her team will have a much better idea of what that number will be. But I think based on what we've got at the moment, I think this is a good plan to get us into the year. And I particularly like the idea of actually managing separate risk elements out of that, and actually addressing it in that way. So that's all I really wanted to say. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Jerry. Now that's a really helpful perspective, actually. And just while you were speaking, and I know Alex is coming in next, obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we've stepped up FRP to be meeting on a monthly basis, and that will continue. Sorry, Alex and committee members, but that will continue while we grapple with this. And I think, again, pulling out, like you've just mentioned there, Jerry, pulling out those sort of managing of the separate risks, and Alex, that would be for you and Hillis to sort of think about how that might be articulated in FRP in a way that supports our ongoing scrutiny around this. And as you said, Jerry, that's going to be the next couple of months are going to be really critical in our understanding of how that's going to go moving forward. But I think that's been a really helpful perspective to bring into the conversation. Thank you. And Alex, I'll bring you in next, please.
Yeah, thanks. No, that was always the intent. The discussion Jerry and Hillis and Fiona and I had yesterday was about this, how we are looking at that risk, especially for adult social care, and we are going to monitor that as a separate entity as we move forward through the year. I like Jerry, fully support what's going on. I like it. I like the way you've broken it down here. I think you've done a marvellous job with this. The question about the Sky thing, though, Fiona talked at the start of the meeting about we've got this action plan to sort out what's happening on Sky. I'm assuming that you haven't had anything additional in terms of costs, etc., to put in here. So is that going to be something that we just sit with and work through the year as part of it? It will come off of either we won't be able to get the supplementary staff saving because we'll need more of them for Sky, or how is that going to work out? Or have you already thought about how we're going to programme that through? Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. I wonder, Fiona, do you want to pick that one up, or?
I was quite happy for Hillis to do it first if she wants to.
I can do. I'm happy to do that. So at the moment, obviously, Sky is too recent to have been reflected within any finance plan. We have presented government with a range of options, and that starts from options within our current budget, and just recognising that due to the background of Sky and the two hospitals, Sky's already consuming a quite significant amount of the board's resource just to run two hospitals, but so that it's over the budget then that we'd originally planned for Sky. But the options presented range from delivering within our current budget through to additionality, and the expectation is if additionality is needed, Scottish Government would give us additional money with that. Or if not, Alex, as you quite rightly said, then they would have to expect that our financial position will deteriorate to that same. That conversation is still very early days, so that plan was only submitted on Friday, so it's too early to comment further on that. You're on mute, Sarah.
Thanks. Okay, I will bring Anne in next, please.
So I think I would certainly endorse Jerry's comments about supporting the approach that the team have taken to setting out our position, particularly in terms of highlighting actions which would take us to a balanced position, but which we do not support because of the impact that they would have on service provision. And I think just to close off on the adult social care situation, I think, my own feeling is that we need to quickly get to a similar position in partnership with the council, where we have identified actions which we think are desirable and achievable, and those which perhaps would address the total gap, including the 7 million, but which at this stage anyway we might feel we're not able to support as a partnership. So just to endorse the approach, and I think we need to rapidly try and get to a position where we see a similar that approach playing out in detail in relation to that gap. But just the other reflection, I guess, I have, and Hillis mentioned it right at the start, is that we don't have the ADP here today, and whilst the position that we have, the budget that the plan that we're being asked to approve is extremely challenging for any board to have to approve. I think it's a shame that we don't have the ADP element to sit beside this to remind us of the substantial amount of money that we do have and that we will be spending in delivering a very wide range of services right across our patch. So I suppose I just wanted to, I hesitate on her first meeting to hand Fiona this task, but I just wondered how you're thinking, Fiona, about the messaging of this, particularly for our staff, in terms of getting an appropriate balance between maintaining morale and enthusiasm and the quality, you know, recognising that there's still an awful lot that we can do and that we are providing for our population, despite the very hard messages we're also having to send out about that 3% and the transformation that will be required. Thanks.
Shall I come in there, Chair?
Yeah, well, I can see that Heleth had popped her hand up. So I don't know, Heleth, if you want to come in first and then Fiona.
Yeah, I was just going to give a positive example, if I can just put a little bit of positivity on this, because I feel as if my entire narrative is doom and gloom at the moment. So a positive example of some of this not having additional money to change is around how we're challenging our staff to look at things differently and do things differently. And even though this isn't direct service provision, we've had a recent example where we had a request to implement the electronic patient record within the board, and that came with a significant financial request, which we obviously couldn't support with the current financial position. The team have gone back and they've reworked that, working with the supplier, working with the team, and working within their current budgets to look at how that could be delivered differently. And they've come back with a proposal that, as an executive team, we could support, and we could give that message back to say there are ways of doing things, but we just need to look at it differently. So it's not that as a board we're saying you can't do anything, you can't make changes. What we're saying is we're going to have to be creative around this and look at how we can do it differently. You know, in that situation, that's the right thing to do, and that means that we will have much better information systems, and it will give better transparency of data, etc. But I guess that's part of the message with the staff. And so answering that part of your question is, we've been around much of the organisation. We've done a lot of Ask Me Anythings as part of the budget setting process to give the worst case and where we are. But then we've also started to work with different teams in a different way to say, let's work through your business case. Let's look at the different options. Let's look at how we can do this differently so we can still deliver improvements and stay within a financial envelope. I think that there are examples where that is happening. We just need to roll that out a little bit bigger, I think, sometimes.
Thanks, Heleth. And Fiona, did you want to add to that in response to Anne?
Yeah, that would be great, Chair. So I suppose for me, it might sound a bit left field, but I think for me the answer starts with strategy. You know, I've had a session with my team and we've agreed collectively that the Together We Care outlines a really clear vision of what we'd like to see people and patients having as outcomes. But I think where we need to go next is to ensure that the plan that sits behind that, if you like, a master plan, is more detailed and clearer and more coordinated as part of the development of our strategic approach. And actually, as I've gone out and met with teams and met with services, I hear great ideas that are coming from our staff that are actually quite transformational, that as yet we haven't fitted through our planning processes to actually turn into reality. So I think that there's still scope and opportunity for us to hear more from our staff and from frontline practitioners and clinicians around ideas that they have of doing things really differently. So one example would be a huge amount of work has been done on developing a mental health strategy with our staff and indeed with members of the public and interested stakeholder groups. But as yet, we haven't been able to mobilise that into a specific plan of action to transform the way that we deliver mental health services in Highland. Now, that all has to come. We have to work our way through that. It's not a criticism of anybody in terms of the work to date, but we have to take those ideas and to work with them, because I think when we propose change that's been championed by our frontline staff as well as the public, then we've got the best chance of making those big leaps forward. So I think it's possible to do the kind of change that we want, taking the staff with us, utilising the energy and ideas and innovation that comes from our staff, as well as our stakeholders, but it's about building the level of coordination and planning that allows us to take that forward.
Thanks, Fiona. I'm actually going to ask, so Anne's question started off around the ADP and where we are with that. And actually, I know we have an item on the agenda around the ADP, but we can't really take it because of where we are, going back to Helen's comments earlier on. But I wonder, Lorraine, if I could just bring you in briefly just to talk about the ADP and where we are, following on from what Helen explained earlier on, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and happy to give a verbal update on where we are. So, as board members will recall, we received guidance on the requirement for the annual delivery plan in December last year. And we have worked to develop that plan collaboratively with our staff and colleagues across the system for Highland, and Argyll and Bute have developed that as well in line with their strategic plan. Within the current ADP, we have set out in our introduction the challenges faced that numerous people have discussed today about our remote, rural and island context, our workforce, including our recruitment and retention, and the outlined financial position set out by Helen. But as Anne has suggested, there is a considerable amount of work that we can do within our current resources, and through working with our colleagues and exec leads, we focused on the areas that we can celebrate success and have really clear deliverables and how we're going to achieve that. So we've mapped that into our annual delivery plan, which focuses on our in-year actions, and as Fiona suggested, that longer term planning about how we can achieve Together We Care and the health outcomes that we want for our population. And the actions within the ADP and the MTP are focused around that ethos of quality and improvement and productivity efficiency, but also importantly prevention. And our medium-term plan aims, as Fiona has described, builds on our current strategic approach, and that we're building that direction set within Together We Care and the national recovery drivers set out across NHS Scotland. So it prioritises those, and it also includes the final year of the strategic plan for Argyll and Bute, and that alignment with the joint strategic plan with Highland Council. So we've taken a consistency of approach across all our well themes, and Argyll and Bute have done a similar approach. And it sets out at the moment our aims and objectives, our key problem statements, and what Helen has described are links to that value and efficiency programmes across each of our themes. So they each have a key set of deliverables and priorities from 2024 to 2027. We've also included at the moment within the ADP that agreed enabling processes and frameworks that we've discussed previously in board, and mainly through the Financial Resources and Performance Committee around decision-making, gateway reviews, so that we've got a focused approach moving forward. However, at the moment, where we are sitting is the ADP MTP was submitted to Scottish Government on the 11th of March, which was the timescale set, and we still await feedback before we take it formally to board and our public session as per our Code of Corporate Governance. So I hope this gives board some assurance of the process that we've went through, and I hope to take that formally to board for approval soon. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Lorraine. That was really helpful. And I know that that was technically the next agenda item, but I just thought it was helpful in the context. And as Helen pointed out at the beginning, you know, you would really always be wanting to consider your financial plan and your ADP together. So I just felt that Lorraine bringing in that update at this point was helpful before we close off this finance item. So I'll just pause. Obviously, we have had a wide ranging discussion, which I think has been very helpful and reflective of the challenge and the concerns that we have. I'll just pause and make sure we don't have any other questions or comments at this point. I'll just make some closing remarks, pulling together some of the sort of themes that we've touched on. So I think first of all, I want to echo comments that Jerry made earlier on. I think you know, would really like to commend Heleth, you and your team, and indeed all the staff that have been working throughout the organisation to, you know, consider how we might deliver services very, very differently in the future, whilst still actually providing, you know, high quality, effective services on a day-to-day basis. I don't think we can underestimate the amount of work that has gone into this, and that would have been the case anyway, but I think just reflecting what it's been like this year, it's been very different, it's been fast changing, so that challenge has been significantly more than it has been in the past in terms of just trying to meet all those requirements and respond to all the different asks that have come into us. So I think we absolutely need to recognise that. We have various members have quite rightly articulated the immense challenge, and I will say it again because I don't think we can overstate it, that challenge in delivering the 3%, never mind the rest of it. And I think we absolutely have to keep reminding ourselves of that. And again, the huge amount of work that our staff will be doing to try and deliver that will be ongoing. And clearly that will be reflected in, and you know, the scrutiny that we'll see through FRP will be appropriate to that. And I think just pulling out the points that have been made repeatedly about the risk, I think that is right, that we have articulated those risks separately as discussed, and that we continue to monitor them in that way through our various governance structures. And I just want to pick up the point, I can't remember at what point in the conversation this came through, but that point about the partnership working. Yes, we've seen some of these challenges develop over the many years, but I would just like to endorse the comments that I think Fiona made earlier on about addressing this together in partnership with the local authority and our other partners and stakeholders. Clearly there's a lot of work to be done there, but that's absolutely how we're going to have to do it. Delivering these services to our communities is going to require everybody's effort, because our people in our communities don't access these services in isolation. It all works together. And I think I would just like to reflect that certainly the work I've seen so far that Fiona has undertaken in her first few weeks to strengthen those relationships and really you know, sort of clear a path as to how we move forward. Fiona's done a huge amount of work there, and I will continue to support her as she moves forward, and Heleth as well, obviously, with her colleagues in the council. So I'll just bring us back to the ask that's associated with this paper at the moment. So we were being asked to take limited assurance from the report and acknowledge the challenge in delivering the 3% recurrent savings and delivering a balanced adult social care budget, and to agree the proposed budget with a 22.2 million gap from the brokerage cap and a commitment to reduce that gap throughout the year. Are members content with that? Okay, I'm getting thumbs up. Thank you very much, and thanks, Heleth, for taking us through that. That was really, really helpful. It was a lot of detail, but I think it was absolutely what was required. We're not going to do the ADP as discussed. Lorraine has given us a really helpful update on that, and board members look forward to getting that back to the board in future once we have received the feedback from the Scottish Government as is required. We are a little bit ahead of schedule, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the next item, which is item number 8. We're going to take the Highland Child Poverty Action Report now, and then we'll break for lunch after that. And I think we have Kathy with us, which is fantastic. So I'll hand over to, I don't know if it's Tim starting and then Kathy, or Kathy's going to take us through it, but I'll hand over for the Child Poverty Action Report, please.
Yeah, I think if Kathy has the knowledge on this, so I'll just invite. I think it's best just to invite Kathy to to present the report.
Thanks, Chair. Afternoon, everyone. Yeah, the report on the Highland Child Poverty Action Plan you have in front of you today. So in 2017, Scottish Government introduced a new Child Poverty Scotland Act, which requires NHS boards to work with local authorities to develop child poverty plans to set out actions that we will undertake in partnership to tackle child poverty. During the pandemic, there was a bit of a gap in reporting, and in Highland we're still catching up with that reporting. So the report that you've got today covers the period 2022 to 2023. It outlines some updated information about child poverty in Highland, and also outlines the actions that were undertaken during 2022-23 and the priority areas that were identified for action during 2023-2024. I won't go into detail, but I'm happy to take any questions on that. But today we are providing this report to the board with limited assurance, and that is based on the fact that we recognise that this report is already a year out of date. We've had some recent discussions with Highland Council, and that we've agreed that we'll get an up-to-date report for 2023-24 to the board by autumn this year, and that should get us back on track in terms of the timescales for reporting nationally on the work on child poverty in Highland. So stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Kathy. That's really helpful. Okay, I will open up for any questions or comments around our Highland Child Poverty Action Report. And I suppose just to note, obviously the SBAR does highlight this, but this relates just to the Highland Council area. Obviously the Argyll and Bute Child Poverty Action Plan goes through the IJB, just in case people were wondering, so that goes there. Susan, I will take you, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this report. I mean, it is interesting, although, as you say, out of date. It's actually a technical question. The report says that this does report to our board. I'm just wondered how the progress and how the achievements are reported. At what point in our board are they reported to a subcommittee, or what? Because this is a plan, but I don't think we've seen a report on the outcome of this plan. Have I missed something?
So the reporting and governance route that's been agreed for Highland is through the Integrated Children's Service Plan. So that's where progress and updates are reported to, and that ultimately reports into the Highland Community Planning Partnership. But there is a requirement for us to bring this report annually to our board and to the full council.
Sorry.
Yes, thank you. I'm still not clear. Yeah, I'm still not clear where this board now, the people sitting here, would have any sight of where those other reports come in. Does anybody understand what I'm talking about? Am I just lost in this? I've lost a track of where this information comes in. I can see the plan here, but I can't imagine where we hear about what has happened as a result of this plan being achieved.
I think you're right, Susan, and I think actually this maybe links in with a previous comment that Fiona made under whichever item it was about reviewing the governance structures around our partnership and our integrated delivery, because I think you're absolutely right. And I don't know, Kathy, I wonder, just to pick up on Susan's point, and I suppose bringing us back more broadly to what Fiona was talking about, you know, looking across the piece around our governance and assurance of our integrated services. Kathy, I wonder, you said that there's going to be an update, you know, to bring us back into sort of the right calendar flow with this reporting. What work is taking place behind the scenes around what that reporting might look like? And I suppose, would there be an opportunity, or what opportunity would there be for us to maybe be a part of those discussions and feed into that, because I suppose the one other part that I would pull in, and again this is a question about kind of integrated governance in this very unique lead agency model. My question when I was looking at this was trying to understand and have clarity, although this report sort of gives us that overarching picture, is understanding sort of which bits we hold responsibility for and what our performance is, you know, so sort of just pulling out in a bit more detail the outcomes, but who's delivering against what. I think we could do some work to develop that. So I don't know, Kathy, if you could explain how that's going to mature going forwards.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, there's been quite a bit of work done over the past, I'd say 9-10 months or so, nationally with Scottish Government and Public Health Scotland, and the Director of Public Health have been involved in that to look at the specific actions that NHS boards should be taking around child poverty and tackling child poverty. And there's now some guidance come through that outlines kind of the 4 key priority areas for NHS boards in particular, and those are highlighted in the SBAR report. So our view is that given we've now got that steer from national government and agencies, that we would look to include that in the next version of the Highland Child Poverty Action Report, so we're much clearer about NHS Highland's contribution overall. I think there is a wider issue still, though, around the Integrated Children's Service Plan and how much sight that NHS Board has on that. I think that's probably a broader discussion, a broader issue than just the child poverty plan, but I would be happy to look at how we make sure that the child poverty work's included in any discussions and review of those governance arrangements.
Okay, no, that's really helpful. Thank you, Kathy. I suppose I'm happy to pick that up offline. I know we have been having conversations about this already, but Fiona and I can certainly pick that up offline with other colleagues around the table to consider how we might take that forward. Because yeah, this isn't quite doing what we need it to do. So I think there's absolutely an opportunity for us to make this better. And you know, we've got our Child Health Commissioner in post earlier this year, which gives us added support and opportunity to look at that. So I think we need to take advantage of that. I can see that Louise is going to come in though. So Louise, I'll bring you in.
Thanks, and it's pertinent that you mentioned our new Child Health Commissioner, because actually that was what I put my hand up to say. She's doing a key piece of work for us, looking at mapping out exactly what we've got, what we haven't got, what we need, and is planning to report back to the Infant, Children's, Young Persons Governance Group later. I think it'll be the June meeting now. So that work is underway to look at the Child Health Plan and children's services in general, and this will all feed into that conversation.
Okay, that's great. And I just wonder, Louise, if we can make sure that obviously that is its own distinct piece of work, but we make sure that ties in with the wider work that we're doing to look at our kind of governance and assurance around the whole suite of integrated services. So make sure that those things are joining up. Sorry, Kathy, did you want to come back in there?
Thanks. Yes, it was just to assure board members that the Child Health Commissioner has been involved in recent discussions with the Council around the Child Poverty Action Report, and was, is involved in the meetings that are taking place with the Council as well. So she will be involved in this work going forward. Absolutely.
Okay, that's good. Thank you, Kathy. And Jerry, I'll bring you in next, please.
Thank you, Sarah. And Kathy may or may not be able to pick up this question. I mean, I totally agree. I think further discussions on where the integrated children's strategy and all of that, all of those different aspects and what sight we have of that, I think would be extremely helpful. What I was thinking of when I was looking at this, and I know this report specifically about child poverty, where does, and it may well be at the community planning partnership, where do all the aspects of the poverty work get pulled together, whether it be food insecurity, fuel poverty, etc., because yes, whilst it's helpful to look at children on its own, child poverty does not happen in isolation. So it's where do we get that overall picture of the impact of that, and then and how that's working its way through, and especially if you look at those 4 priority areas which maybe the health board is going to have a look at, is in terms of that income maximisation, etc., and how can we actually influence that going forward? But I think we have to influence it in the round in terms of looking at all of those pieces together. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry. And I can see that Tim has his hand up, so I'll bring you in, Tim.
Yeah, I think there are 2 comments to make. First of all, the general poverty issues are covered to an extent within the social mitigation plan, which the board has approved. Also, I think there are elements of this which is included more generally within population health and such areas as Anchor's work and how we relate as a corporate citizen in the board to the communities around us. Although that's a little bit vaguer. I think there's perhaps a more fundamental issue relating to a lot of these things. It's which links with the governance and how the board is cited, is how we look at the broader issues of health, where they're not determined just by what happens within the board, but they're determined by wider things which may be things more specific like drug-related deaths or suicide, maybe more general like employment and income. And the answer in the sort of the textbook answer would be that's dealt with through the community planning partnership and the other routes into the community planning partnership. But I think we need to make sure that the governance of that is done appropriately, and that for both community planning partnerships we're able to have that right level of input, and where we don't, if we don't feel there's that right level of input, then we need to establish procedures within the board to be able to consider that and look at how we can put that appropriate input in. So I suspect it will end up with a mixture of having more input into each of the 2 CPPs in some ways, and trying to get more visible reporting and more consideration of those type of issues on the one hand, and secondly, it wouldn't surprise me if we need a bit more of that type of input in the board as a whole.
Thank you, Tim. Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands up. So just to remind everybody what's being asked here. So we are being asked to take limited assurance at this time, recognising that an update report for 23-24 will be developed this autumn, and that will identify actions that NHS Highland intend to take to impact child poverty based on the 4 priority areas outlined in the report, and that will provide assurance for 23-24 to ensure that we meet the requirements of the Child Poverty Scotland Act. Are members happy with that at this time? Yeah, and we'll get further update in the future. Fantastic. Thank you, Kathy, for joining a little bit early. We sprung that on you, but well done. Thank you for jumping in. It's much appreciated. So I'm going to propose that we take our lunch break now. So if we take half an hour, and I will see you all back here at 1:15.